I think the exploration of the vanity versus vulnerability was interesting. It's interesting to see how people react because, you kind of give them a new way of thinking about the concept of vanity. Because generally, vanity is just seen as something negative. And I think we need to sort of understand that though something can be more negative, there might also be something positive in it, right? Thanks so much for reaching out. It's really cool.
No, I'm thrilled that you had time to meet today, Dan. Thank you so much for that. I think you're one of the first people who actually submitted back to me questions that were more interesting than the ones that I sent to you. So I'm sort of thinking we can just cover some of the basics for some context.
Of course.
And then maybe jump into some of what you were suggesting we could talk about, because I found that really interesting.
Yeah. So where would you like me to start then?
Maybe just talk a little bit about why you decided to become a photographer and a little bit of that decision between, I know you were doing your PhD and then you decided to go full-time into photography and how that happened.
The way I sort of discovered photography was through my PhD. I mean, like, other than the fact that I was always interested in image, and my father always had National Geographic subscriptions. And so I would always look at these photos and I was always interested in that kind of a thing. But really, like, my first time that I actually used a camera was during my PhD. One of the projects I was working on, we needed to make 3D models of people's heads and people's helmets. My PhD was in biomechanics, and I was looking at how to maybe increase the fit of helmets, both for comfort but also for safety. The two major ways that you can do that is either with this laser scanner, and those things go for like $50,000, or something that was just starting to become accessible to people is something called photogrammetry. And photogrammetry is a technique where you take a series of photos around an object, put it through a computer program, and almost like a panorama that stitches it together, it sort of folds the photos into themselves and you get a 3D image. The better the camera, the higher resolution the camera, the more detail you would get, and the better the 3D object you would get. So rather than have the lab pay to buy a camera, I told my supervisor, look, I'll buy the camera because I've always been interested in this. And that way I don't feel, bad to bring it home because it's not lab equipment, it's mine. And so that's kind of how it happened. I bought the camera, use it in the lab, would come home, play around with it. And I really just fell in love with this, this direct feedback. And then from there, because I'd been doing martial arts, I started to photograph tournaments. And then people started to take notice and they're like, wow, these are really good. Do you want to do the next one? And then sure. And then they're offering to pay for my work. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And then I would use that to sort of jump to the next tournament and sort of slowly build while I was still doing the PhD. Now, in terms of why I decided to do the switch, to be honest, I wasn't really happy with what I was doing in my PhD. I didn't necessarily like the environment that I was in. I'm really not into hockey, but it was a hockey lab. But the thing is, I figured it's biomechanics, which did interest me. And then I could sort of do this to get the kind of work that I want to be doing. But while doing a PhD, you really end up doing the kind of work that you're going to end up doing. So I was working, for instance, with Bauer. They were a collaborator in our lab, and so we were doing work with them. I was also working with Institut National de Sport du Québec, which is sort of affiliated with the national and the local Olympic teams. And so I was working with speed skaters and really, like, anybody else who would want to be doing that kind of thing would have been really happy with that. that kind of work, like working with Bauer, working with, Olympic teams. I was going to Calgary to look at to work with the national short track speed skating team. It was like really great stuff, but I just hated what I was doing. I really hated what I was doing. And it took me about 2 years to finally realize that I could actually make photography the thing that I do. It doesn't have to be something on the side. It's a viable profession. And it's something I really love doing. More and more people were taking notice of my work. I was getting better. I was engaged. I was learning. And that's sort of the thing that's important is it's this like sense of mastery that I was feeling. It's like slowly chipping away at something and seeing progress. And really the most important part was that when you're working for, let's say the Olympic short track speed skating team, they need someone who's good and dedicated and loves what they're doing, right? Because you're talking about athlete safety, you're talking about athlete performance. And although my performance was fine, everybody was like, you're doing great, you're doing great. I was like, I could be doing something else and I could be doing it so much better. And you guys can have someone better than me in this position. So those were kind of things that led to me deciding to pursue photography full time.
So you went from like advanced study in biomechanics to self-taught photographer. Did you take any courses or?
No, it was all self-taught. So to be quite honest, like I could see my deficiencies, like it's one of those things like the more you know you don't know. Right. So at first, you take a few photos and you're like, wow, they look great. I'm a photographer. It's like, no, that's not how it works. But, you get that feeling of like, wow, it looks great. I'm doing great. But yeah, it was all self-taught. So reading up on things, a couple of books, and then honestly, a lot of videos on YouTube. Like YouTube was sort of like my education for photography. And what's interesting is, as I start to learn more and more about photography, I start to realize that beyond the technical skill of like knowing how to operate a camera in manual, knowing how to just do the nuts and bolts and to take a photo that's well exposed, let's say, I realized I need to actually sort of teach myself some of the history, some of the art history. And that's kind of where I started to learn about street photography. The more I learned about that, that's where I started to see what I was lacking without a proper education in photography. Because I think those things are super important because they inform you about what's been done, what kinds of things can be done, and really like history just teaches you so much that is important beyond, like I said, the nuts and bolts.
I find that interesting too, because when I look on your website, I know you work on wedding and portrait photography as well as street photography. And you say street photography is where you got your start. And when you were explaining about doing photography at sports tournaments, that actually seems like such a natural segue because in sports, people are in motion. They're not standing still and posing for you. There's a lot of action. Street photography, same thing. Nobody's stopping to pose for you. You're taking pictures of people in action being themselves, as opposed to more formal, maybe portraits or wedding photos. I don't know if that makes sense.
For sure. And actually something related to that is one of the things that I really loved about photographing martial arts tournaments and MMA tournaments was that there was no veil between me and the subject. In those instances, people are so focused on what they're doing and they're really like in the moment, except for a few times when someone's winning and then they see me and then they look at me, which is rare. And it's almost like they're peacocking at that point, right? Like, but generally what I loved about it was how like authentic and raw the photos that you get actually are. And similarly, that's how it is with street photography when you're taking more candid shots, when you're sort of working a scene and then you just have something happen, which is organic. And so, like you said, there is that sort of like similar skill of being able to capture something quickly
Interesting.
Yeah.
And also that idea you said about the veil. So their
Yeah.
guard is down. They are not aware that their photo is being taken because they're so captured in their moment, as opposed to a more formal setting where it's my wedding and I'm smiling
Yeah.
at you because I'm trying to show you something about myself. I'm trying to be much more aware about what it is I'm showing about
Yeah.
myself to you, as opposed to in a tournament where people are not, I mean, less until they spot you and smile at you.
Yeah,
Their
which
picture
like I
taken.
said, it's rare and it's funny when it happens, but the other stuff is the interesting stuff. Like when you really start to see people in a way that they're not showing you anything artificial. You know,
Exactly.
the kind of street photography I do, I don't try to be sneaky. If you're trying to be sneaky, people kind of notice you more. That's another thing that I learned is like how to kind of become invisible, being a part of the scene so much so that people don't really necessarily notice that there's anything strange going on.
You're like a street lamp. It's
Exactly.
part of the
Sure.
scenery.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Sort of one of your questions that you wanted to talk about is that idea of permission. From my understanding, the way street photography works is if there's no expectation of privacy, then there's no problem, right? And so if you're in a public space, there are cameras, CCTVs, there are people taking selfies or filming something because they're a tourist. And so it's the same thing. You know, if I were to take a picture as a tourist and someone happens to walk in front of the camera, that's the same thing as if I intentionally took that photo of someone in public.
There's the legal aspect, and I'm going to show how neurotic I am now because
Mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm,
my head, like there's also this moral aspect of permission where we were speaking before about the fact that when people are out, they don't know their picture's being taken. And so their guard is down in that sense. They don't know what they're revealing about themselves. They don't know how they look as they're walking. They're not thinking about they might be engaged in a conversation. They might be on the phone. They might be looking in a window. They're not paying attention, as opposed to the wedding or the portrait photographs where people have explicitly asked you, given you permissions, take my picture. And I know you're taking my picture and I'm really going to pay attention. I'm still going to reveal a lot about myself that I don't know that I'm doing that, but
mm-hmm.
and that's why I say this is my neurotic self, because I
Sure.
worry about that. Like, what are people seeing when they look
Mm-hmm.
at people they're
Mm-hmm.
taking
Mm-hmm.
photographs of? What am I
Yeah,
showing about myself?
yeah. So that's something that's interesting. So you've mentioned taking photos at a wedding, and there always, you know, there's different styles, and there always will be posed photos. But especially now, like the number of clients who are like, "Oh, I really like candid shots."
Absolutely. Yeah, you're
Um,
right.
Now, what's funny is, I mean, how candid is it when it is your wedding and you've got, you know, 100 of your closest friends and family, everyone is watching you. You are the subject of the day. But at least up to a point, people do appreciate that level of sort of having people see them without the veil. That's kind of why I say that I got my reps in street photography, is because you need to sort of find those moments where people are more vulnerable, where people are being more honest, where they can't help themselves but just be present.
I'm going to take this opportunity to segue into the topic that you introduced when you answered me back about doing this
Sure, sure.
interview and talking about this axis between vulnerability and vanity
Mm-hmm,
in protecting the ego. Can you
mm-hmm.
just explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
So, especially today, there's such an emphasis on the self and vanity in the sense of a lot of people taking selfies, people sharing on social media what they're doing, how great their life looks, what they're eating, etc. And I was
Can I
thinking,
can I just
yeah,
interrupt you for 1 second? I just had
of
to share
course.
one other example because
No,
I
no, of
just saw
course.
it this morning and I thought of
Sure,
it right when
sure.
you were saying that.
Yeah.
Because I'm very much behind in the social media things and the reels and the
Mm-hmm.
thises and the that's. Somebody shared with me this morning a video with a split screen, and on the left side was what I think was the funny video. That's like what we're supposed to be looking at. And the right side of the screen was somebody laughing at the thing that they were. And I was like, Why am
What's
I
going
looking
on?
at that person? What is that?
I don't I don't know what that is, but that started I'd say in the past year or so, is these like reaction videos, people filming themselves. And I don't understand any of that. I really don't understand that. But yeah, I've seen those before too. And the funny thing about those reaction videos is that they're not natural. A lot of them are acted.
And it's almost like a selfie on crack. It's this totally posed moment. And then I thought, well, I mean, are they trying to reinforce that it's funny? Or do they just want to be associated with this, that somehow they are part of this video that was created by somebody they
Mhm,
probably don't know and have never,
mhm.
but they're associated. So they're just kind of making themselves part of this video story.
Yeah,
I'm obviously way behind the time. I'm at least a
yeah,
year behind, but I was so surprised.
yeah. I mean, listen, I don't. Yeah, I'm also not really into that kind of stuff. Like in terms of like social media, I'm very much behind as well. Like it's hard for me to post things. We'll get to that after with the legitimate vulnerability part of thing. But okay, so this vanity thing it's kind of that, right? But then I started thinking, what is the difference between an artist posting their work or sharing their work because of an accomplishment that they've done versus, let's say, a really buff dude showing a selfie of themselves at the gym. Okay. And so I'm asking it rhetorically, and I could kind of tell you what I've sort of walked through. And the person who is photographing themselves at the gym and showing their progress, I see that almost as, their focus and where they hold value. And they're showing work and progress in something. And then they're displaying, where they put their energy. And I see that similarly with an artist as well. I see that similarly with someone who, just graduated and got a degree and they post a photo of themselves. The knee jerk reaction to the jack dude in the gym is like, oh, this guy's so vain because it's so obviously vain. But I just don't know if showing work that you do because you want praise, right? In the social media age, whether it's likes, shares, whatever it might be, if your intention is basically the same, then I don't necessarily see the distinction as clear as you might, reflexively see.
I wonder if it also has something to do with our judgment of what it
Mhm.
took to achieve that. So you've been doing martial arts most of your life, right? I've been training most of
Yeah.
my life. When I see pictures of people at the gym, I admire that because I know how hard it is. They really have achieved something to
Hmm.
be able to look the way that they do. And I guess I would distinguish that from, and this is my judgment, I would distinguish that from someone who puts themselves on the split video screen with a video showing their reaction to it because they haven't accomplished anything but
Sure.
finding that video and putting
Sure.
themselves in it. But maybe that's just my judgment. Maybe it's hard to find funny videos, and I should appreciate that they're just saying, I've done this great thing. I found this funny video and I'm sharing it with you. And that's the part that I want you to recognize that achievement.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I do judge and say there are certain achievements that I think have more validity because they were hard to do. And if
Hmm.
you want to mark that moment and it's a graduation photo, I think
Hmm.
I see what you're saying. I think, but there's something around the achievement and how we perceive the value of the achievement
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
somebody wants to associate them or get attention for that.
Hmm. It's sort of like the reward is in the journey itself. And so it shouldn't matter that you did finish whatever it is that you've done. And again, maybe I'm really pushing this idea to its limit because it starts to break down. But I'm kind of like reconsidering this reflex and trying to see if it is as vain or it's any more vain to just show a selfie, which again I hate those, but I'm just trying to be devil's advocate here and
Sure.
argue against my own reflex.
So would you say that there's a common motivation. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
common motivation behind all opportunities people take to show themselves to the world, to be
Mm-hmm.
noticed. And
Exactly.
it's as simple as I want to be noticed for whatever it happens to be I can put out there.
Exactly. It's that need for validation from others. And that's where I see them as similar.
And I just want to distinguish, and it might not be quite, and again, this might be pushing it too far, but there's a need to be seen and there's a need to be validated. And need to be seen, I think, is even more fundamental than validated, because validated is you're putting something else, you're putting yourself out there and you want to get recognition that you've done something good. You want to be praised for what you've done. Even below that, I think there's just that level of, I want you to see me. You can approve or not approve. I could get your validation or not. But if you just notice that I'm there, and that's one of the cool things about photography, I think, too, is that you're noticing, you're making a record of, if you're photographing people, you're making a record that that person exists and is somehow being seen.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You're saying this day, this year, this person was here, right? It's one of those like I am here kind of thing.
That's very fundamental. That's very like, it's, it's nice to be seen for other things, like seen for the kind of person that you are or some, but that very fundamental level of being seen and then up to be. So, okay. So I take your point. I see so are you saying that that desire to be noticed out in the world and praised is vanity? That's our vanity.
I'm saying just to make it simple, I'm seeing that as a similar type of vanity. I'm seeing that as a similar thing, but it's kind of covered up because of whatever the achievement might be, or because of certain societal values. But I guess it has to do with the intention of the person doing the thing at that point in time. Why is it that you're sharing it? Is it really that you need to get people to tell you congratulations? Is it really because you need people to tell you whatever you did was so great? That need for validation, I think, is at least cousins with or siblings with the need for that same validation just for taking a pretty picture of yourself on a yacht, on a beach, whatever. So yeah, essentially I've just kind of noticed that it's not so cut and dry, or at least I think it might not be so cut and dry, and that intention is really important in this idea of vanity.
Okay, agreed. Okay, so we've got one pole, our vanity pole, and then on the other end of the axis, we've got our vulnerability.
Yeah.
So how did those connect?
So
I'm pushing you, Dan. I feel like I'm grilling you. It's just it's like a PhD examination.
No, this is great. Especially at 10 a.m. We gotta get the neurons firing for the rest of the day. I think vulnerability, and I'm just going to bring it back to street photography. Vulnerability is the person who notices that you took a photo of them when they didn't know. When you took the photo, it was really a candid moment. They look at the photo. They notice that you saw them for who they are in that photo, in that moment. So I do think, and this is just one example of it, that vulnerability is when you actually show people the authentic and unveiled self. And I think that's extremely difficult. I think that's extremely difficult to do. I think, at least I've had a few experiences with that, with work that I've done, which when I shared the work, it was really like, I want people to understand how I see things. I want people to understand what I'm thinking just through a photo. And I think that's kind of where, and this is interesting with photography, or at least what kind of photography that I do. I think that's really that line between craft and art, or work and art. And so just to sort of go back a moment, like it took me a while to tell people I am a photographer because I didn't feel like I was this sort of label. I also really don't think I'm an artist, even though I have done some art. I think that point where you actually start to share intimate things about yourself, whether they're ideas or they're ways of seeing the world that you can actually make people see the way you see. I think that's kind of when you're getting into the art territory. And I also think that's where you're starting to show real vulnerability.
I mean, I realize that we're also talking about the two perspectives. So vulnerability of your subjects
Yeah.
being photographed and your vulnerability as a photographer.
Yeah.
Because you're exposing through your photos, you are exposing yourself, how you see the world, your view, what you think is important. How long before you started sharing your photographs? How long were you taking photographs before you started putting them out there either to be sold or for exhibit or?
It took me about 6 months to a year to start to share the work and to start to feel confident to go into spaces like tournaments, photograph them, and then, share it with people. The first time I actually sort of like shared something in a vulnerable way was after a tournament. So with these tournaments, people always want like a lot of photos. They want them quick. And so you can't really work the photo. You can't sort of edit them the way you want or anything like that. So I'd done this tournament, gave the photos really quickly, like 1,000 photos in a day. And again, I was feeling this frustration with what was going on with my PhD. And then like I often do, I stayed up way too late, thinking and editing work. And I went through those photos again and I just did a re-edit. I selected something like 20 to 30 of the 1,000 photos and I edited them in a certain way. And when I shared that, that's really when people realized that I had some kind of skill. And when I hesitated to share those photos because I don't know, I put this extra work, this extra effort, and this extra time. And I was kind of writing at the same time, going through the photos, writing, going through the photos and writing. And then I shared both those things, the writing plus the photos. And I remember feeling nervous, right? And that's the vulnerability part. What was funny is I hesitated to share. I was nervous to share. But when I did, that's actually when people took the most notice of my work. Before that, it was like, oh, this guy, he's pretty good. He takes pictures. He can work this event. But then people were like, wow, this is really special. And that was just something that on the one hand, it sort of like charged me and energized me. But on the other hand, I really did feel like I exposed a lot of myself. And more recently, I'm sort of doing that kind of thing again with work that I've done. And it's like every time I share some of my photos with some of my thoughts, it really takes a lot out of me. So that's just, I think that's something I'm going to have to get used to is going through that sort of like up to that point of sharing, exposing yourself, and then being able to come back and sort of like reset.
It took about a year after you started taking photographs to share them. How long did it take for you to call yourself a photographer?
Basically, once I quit the PhD and decided to do this full time.
So it was more about that it had become your profession.
Yeah, I would say that was probably when I started to feel more comfortable. And actually, it wasn't that I felt more comfortable. It's just that I had to tell people that because they were hiring me. So I can't say, oh, I'm not a photographer, but you're hiring a photographer. It's like, it's almost like it came from the outside. It was like an obligation. Like if they're gonna hire someone who is going to be taking photos, well, they better be a photographer.
Fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah, yeah. And so that was the funny thing is how I had to just kind of suck it up and tell people like that's the thing I do.
I wanted to just circle back for a minute because
Sure.
we were talking about your either increasing comfort or decreasing discomfort with being vulnerable, sharing your work, showing yourself through your work. So we sort of look at where you are on the vulnerability scale. Where are you on the vanity scale? If we look at these things as sort
Sure.
of balancing concepts, where would you say you are in terms of your vanity?
That's a good question because I'm not sure, right? And this is kind of why I raised the point of, what is vanity really? Because when I share work, at least in my case, it's for two reasons. Reason number one can be the sort of more vulnerable reason of you want to actually share something because you have an idea, you have something to say, etc. But very practically for me, it's how I get work. And so that's kind of why I'm trying to figure out what this connection between vanity is and like actual vulnerability. So, and that's also why it's hard for me to share work that is more on the vanity end of things, is because I don't like that. I don't like the feeling of posting something just so that people can see where your skill is, to see if they might hire you, right? This idea of like marketing yourself. I know it's super important. I have trouble with that because I do think all of that is related to this sort of vanity thing. So where am I in terms of vanity? It's I guess I'm just hyper aware of it. And I'm always trying to figure out, am I posting this because I have something to say? Or am I posting this because I want people to tell me how great it is or to hire me for the next job?
It's interesting to me because throughout these podcast conversations, my idea about what vulnerability means is evolving, but it's also shifting all the time. Every time I speak to somebody different, it goes off in a different direction. I haven't firmed it up at all.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about just it being kind of an authentic openness. And that can be painful or less painful. So it doesn't just necessarily mean you're open to be hurt. You're just open. I'm open. And vanity is starting to feel to me like an authentic desire just to be seen. And it not necessarily for any payback, although, like you said, practically speaking, in your case, you do have to show photos because if you don't, people are not going to hire you as a photographer. They need to see your work and they need to know what you do. They need to find out about you. There's no other way to make a living as a photographer, probably.
Yeah.
Today, anyway. But just reconceptualizing vanity as a very natural desire to put yourself and what you do out to be seen. It doesn't have to be to be admired or lavishly praised or whatever, just to be seen. Yeah. And that's cool. That's okay.
Yeah. And I think that is something that, I'm personally struggling with, because like we've said, that's kind of the only way for people to know what I do. And that's kind of the only way, I'll get work. And the thing is that work then allows me to do other projects that are sort of the personal projects or the more meaningful work that you might not get paid for, but you want to do anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's probably always been true in some sense, but it's particularly in our super hyper visual social culture. If you're not doing that, then I think it's hard to be seen.
Yeah, for sure.
Was there anything else that you thought of that we haven't talked about that you wanted to share?
What led you to start, or what led you to explore this concept of vulnerability in artists?
That's a $64,000 question, Dan. I have been asked a few times and I answer it differently every time. So clearly I don't really know. But very quickly, my background is in corporate learning design. So I'm an instructional designer. I create workshops and manuals and things for people to learn about their jobs, how to do their jobs. And I've been doing that for a long, long time as an independent consultant. And for quite a while now, I've felt that there's something that was missing from that, the way that we approach doing that. And there's some work in the field that kind of like hints at it, but people tend not to take it. So people usually focus when it comes to learning on what's happening in your head. Like what are the cognitive requirements? How do we set up an academic program, whatever it is? They don't think so much about the heart, and they don't think much about the body unless it's martial arts or hockey or some other sport or golf, something that you actually have to learn how to do something. So it's psychomotor, affective is how you feel about it, and cognitive is how you think about it. So I felt that the affective part of learning was missing. And so I wrote something about how to help create spaces for people to experience the emotion of learning, a big part of which is being vulnerable to being wrong, to not understanding, to feeling lost, especially for adults. So there's more work being done now for young kids to prepare them at school and like take care of how they feel and their motivation and their attitude and all that kind of stuff, in addition to learning math and physics and history and those things. But not so much for adults. And how the leap happened to artists and vulnerability, I cannot tell you. I don't know. Except that, I draw a bit, I do things like that. And I have never in my entire life felt comfortable either devoting time to it or sharing it with anybody because I felt way too scared. I wouldn't risk it. So it was personal too.
Yeah. So you're trying to answer a question that you're grappling with by asking other people. I think I'm just talking about my personal experience and friends of mine who also do this kind of work. I think a lot of work in art or work in documentation, like working on a documentary, I think a lot of that comes down to trying to find yourself in the other.
Oh, interesting.
And almost like trying to see if there is somebody out there that also has those same ideas, and then it kind of helps you put it together in your own mind. It's kind of like, there's something there, you haven't been able to sort of line it up into like a cogent thought, and you need others to sort of help mold it. And so you keep exploring through like your own ideas through others.
That's super cool. I wouldn't have come to that, Dan. Thank you for that. It's a nice way to think about it.
Yeah. And so I wonder if that might be part of it is you're kind of, you might just be trying to answer a question or this question and figure out how, I don't know, maybe how you can feel comfortable sharing some of your own work.
I may get there. I do put drawings now on Instagram. I am a strange combination of I can draw something I'm really proud of and I can put it on Instagram. I can't. See, that's why I'm amazed by what you did. I can't quit my day job and dedicate myself to really putting in the effort to get better at doing something like drawing. I'm a corporate consultant, and that's where I feel safe. So I can dabble. And if I make something, I'm not shy. I'm vain enough to put it on Instagram and say, I like this. I like this. I put photos too. I put photos and I put drawings. I can do that. But I don't have I want to use the word vanity again, but I'm not sure it really fits. But I don't have the
confidence, maybe
the confidence or the presence or the sense, strong enough sense of whatever is missing to just say, F the consulting, man. I want to do something else.
Yeah, well, I would just say that that confidence does come with the feedback you get from others.
Right.
And that's kind of that. This is the weird sort of paradox of wanting to share work that you do, or fighting the urge not to share work that you do. But then when you do, as you get better, you actually start to get that feedback, and you start to get that confidence because people are willing to, let's say, pay for your work. And
whoa. That would be
but
like,
that's what I mean.
whoa.
But that's what I mean. It takes that sort of like leap of like showing your work consistently and
Right.
I mean, it might be because that's why like I think photography is a bit of an interesting medium, is because it really is like it really is a profession like a barber or a carpenter, or like it really is something that you can just do and someone can hire you to do. And it's needed in ways that are very sort of mundane, you know, like I just need a picture of this mouse so I could sell it. Whereas with things like drawing, building installations, things like that, it's it's difficult to actually, in a sense, find people who see the value enough to sort of like pay you for that work.
Just something you said about, if a barber or a carpenter, what's cool about a barber is if you can see the haircut and say, oh, I know who did that. Or if you
Oh yeah.
see a table and you're like, I know who made that. So
Mm-hmm.
whether it's more of a craft or more of an art, that
Mm-hmm.
ability to notice. So if I can look at photographs and say, that's Dan's, I know it's Dan's, like that has that Dan feel to it. That's
Sure.
an artistry to it that goes beyond somebody who's just like takes the mouse and there's nothing of that person in the photo. And I don't even know how to measure that or really talk about that, but it's kind of like there's the Diane Arbus exhibit that's on right now at the museum.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever looked at any Diane Arbus photos and you look at one, you're like it can't be anybody else's. It's
Yeah.
hers. And I don't know what it is in the photo that tells you that, but it's obvious that it's hers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the artistry for her. Anybody else
Yeah.
could have taken that photo. It wouldn't look the same. Like just put those same people there. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
same.
Mm-hmm. And that is the part of that is what you're seeing when you see that you know, distinct, iconic, I know who it is. That is when you're actually starting to see the person from the inside.
Absolutely.
That's the cool thing, is that's when you start to actually start to notice how it is that that person sees things, how it is that that person builds things, right? Like when you take a photo, you're actually building and composing and you're projecting your own thought and your own skill.
And that's the part that's scary for me that I admire in others, because that part that comes through is what you're showing. And people
Yeah,
can judge that. That's
sure.
good. That's bad. That's authentic. That's not authentic. That's derivative. That's whatever it is. That's the part that intimidates me. It's what I'm revealing through what I
Mm-hmm.
do. If I could even get to the point where it's distinctive enough that people could see what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I admire. And so for you, for example, to go from doing your PhD in biomechanics, dumping that sunk cost.
It was really like a 2 year me fighting with myself for 2 years. And that was the thing, is I was so stuck halfway between each. And whenever I would work on the PhD, all I wanted to do was photography. And when I was working on photography, I knew I was wasting time that could be devoted to the PhD. Now it's starting to get a little bit real, but when I was doing my PhD and not happy doing that, you talked about the sunk cost, like that was hard to swallow, because I was like, and the advice I got from most people was just finish it, right? Just finish it, and at least you have that thing. And it's like, well, at least I have what? It's like it's all this effort, all this energy. It's a couple more years. I was doing it for 4 years. I knew it would take me probably 6 to complete, because I was wasting so much of my time, or what felt like I was wasting my time and my energy. You know, you start to get into these dark places, and I think I was struggling through depression when I was doing that. When I was kind of trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with the rest of my life. And then something that I kept thinking about was actually death. Like it's just like, for some reason, I would regularly think of just, you know, at the end of my life, will I think what I did was worth it? Okay. And that sort of got me thinking about this concept of mastery. And you allot your time into things you value. And it got me thinking of this concept of infinity. Okay, so infinity is something we're never going to actually experience. Okay, so again, in math, there's something called an asymptote, which is sort of approaching a number, right? So essentially, our life approaches the closest subjective thing to infinity that we're going to ever experience. It's like you live 70 years. Well, then that's your closest experience of infinity. And so the the best thing that you're ever going to be is the thing that you put the most time into. And so that thing actually starts to approach infinity, at least subjectively, your own version of infinity. And so I kept thinking, like, what do I want my infinity to be? Right? What do I want my version? It's my version of infinity to be. You have your friends, your family. Those are all versions of infinity. But in terms of the thing that you wake up and keep working at up until the end, what is that infinity going to be? And that was the thing. I was like, man, it has to be photography.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's all good. Again, this kind of thing is really fun. I love just like not only talking to people, but also just exploring ideas. So I really appreciate reaching out.
Cool. Thank you.